I give the CIA a total credit for sponsoring and initiating the entire consciousness movement, counterculture events of the 1960s.
All right. Welcome back to Rise to Liberty podcast. Let's see here. Just making sure everything on my end is working well. All the streams seem to be looking just fine. Okay. So, how is everyone doing this fine Sunday? Happy Mother's Day to all the wonderful mothers out there. Let's see here. I actually had a really funny post I wanted to bring up just real quick. Let's see. If I can find it real quick. Yeah, here we go. Happy Mother's Day. Oh, fucking toad. Hilarious. Anyways, okay. So, let's see. So, I wasn't going to do a stream today because it is Mother's Day. However, we will be doing streams on Sundays. Today's plan is a little bit different. But let's see. Before we get ahead of ourselves, make sure and pop on over to Nadu Shave Co. These guys have the balls to sponsor this show, and we want to make sure and show them some love back. So make sure and pop on over to there. Go check out what they have. They have more than just razors. They have soap, and I just got myself some. So make sure and pop on over there. Go let them know that we sent you. So scan that little QR code or head over to nadeaushaveco.com. Use promo code RISE15 to get 15% off at checkout. So make sure and go check that out. They are absolutely the best. I love the products. Can't say enough good about them. Other than that, let's see here. Before we get going too deep, anyone that wants to help out the show, anyone that wants to support what I'm doing, any of the research that I'm doing, you can head over to risetoliberty.com/coffee and go buy me a coffee. Or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/deprogram. risetoliberty.com/coffee is a lot easier though. So check that out. Anyone that wants to help support. I am a one-man skeleton crew that runs this. So any help in the world is always appreciated. Also, if you don't want to go there, you can head over to Ko-Fi. So ko-fi.com/risetoliberty. Both options are one-time donations or monthly reoccurring donations. Any amount you want, $5 minimum on both. Also, let's see here. Let's not forget this. Of course, I didn't have this pulled up because, you know what, that's just how we do things around here. It just happens sometimes. So head on over to risetoliberty.store. We've got some new merch that just dropped. Go get yourself a Mind Control t-shirt, an American pastime since 1953. Pretty fitting for today's topic. There are two different t-shirt options. It's just the quality that's different. The design's the same. You have the Mind Control design on the front, big old Rise to Liberty on the back. You can also pick it up in a coffee mug. It's an 11-ounce ceramic coffee mug. Everything's super high quality, so I recommend that. Those are the best ways to help out the show. Otherwise, if for whatever reason you don't want to spend any money but still want to help the show, the best way to do that, hit the like, subscribe, follow, share, comment, all of these things, all of the things that all creators say. These are definitely the best ways. And in fact, hitting the like and sharing, all of those things help out a lot more than you would actually think. They do so much. So, with all of that out of the way, let's get into it, shall we? So today we will be covering Laurel Canyon. We will be covering LSD, or at least starting to. So, like I said, normally we will not be covering this sort of stuff on Sundays. This topic will actually be covered on Thursdays. But just the way that everything worked out, we're doing this today. But expect more Laurel Canyon, LSD stuff, MK Ultra, mind control, all of that sort of stuff on Thursdays. Excuse me. Normally on Sundays, we will be covering the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, Revolutionary War history, that sort of stuff. We'll be covering, if there's anything like super crazy in the news, then we'll be covering that. But today is Laurel Canyon, LSD, all of that fun stuff. So why did I want to start this? Now, a lot of people, a lot of researchers in this arena or whatever, they kind of tend to not focus on LSD because it's, well, I mean, each different researcher has their own reasons as to why they're not focusing on it. All legitimate. The reason why I'm choosing to focus on it, and not just LSD, but all drugs. We're going to be covering heroin, speed, just opium in general. The reason why I'm going to be doing a series on it is because even though MK Ultra and mind control is so much more than that, it is still a huge, massive aspect of it. On top of that, drugs is a massive part of our culture, and it shapes so much. So we are just going to do this, kind of knock it out of the way so we can get to other topics. However, it is important, so we will be here for just a minute. And for anyone interested, we will be working from two different sources today. We will be working from what David McGowan has written, not necessarily from the book itself, but for anyone curious, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon is going to be covering a lot of stuff. Also, we will be working from Drugs as Weapons Against Us from John L. Potash. Let's see here. So, with that said, let's get into it, shall we? What exactly is LSD? So, lysergic acid dithymolide, or dithylmide. LSD 25, L-Lucy acid, SID, I've also heard. It is a classic psychedelic substance of the lysergamide class. It is perhaps the most researched and culturally influential psychedelic substance, as well as the prototypical lysergamide. The mechanism of action is not fully known, although serotonin binding activity is thought to be involved. The psychoactive effects of LSD were first discovered in 1943 by Dr. Albert Hoffman at Sandoz Laboratories in Switzerland. In the 1950s, it is widely distributed by Sandoz as an experimental drug for psychotherapy and scientific research. During this era, it has provoked considerable interest from the intellectual establishment and was even the subject of a clandestine investigation by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, 4 potential applications in mind control. And boy, did they use it. Jeez. I feel like I've got a hair somewhere. Let's see. Reluctant LSD use became a central, highly visible aspect of the 1960s youth culture movement, eventually paving the way for international prohibition in 1971. Today, illicit recreational use remains widespread, and it is associated in popular culture with the counterculture and rave scenes. The lifetime prevalence of LSD use among American adults is somewhere between 6 to 8%. Following decades of institutional suppression, scientific research involving LSD has recently undergone a massive revival as part of the so-called psychedelic renaissance. It is currently being investigated in the treatment of a number of conditions, including alcoholism, substance addiction, cluster headache, autism, and anxiety associated with terminal illness. Subjective effects include visual geometry, hallucinatory states, time distortion, enhanced introspection, conceptual thinking, increased music appreciation, euphoria, and ego loss or ego death. LSD use is reportedly associated with mystical type experiences that are sometimes claimed to facilitate self-reflection and personal growth. It has been called the first modern ethogen, a group which is otherwise limited to traditional plant preparations or extracts. Unlike most highly prohibited substances, LSD has not been proven to be psychologically toxic or addictive. However, adverse psychological reactions such as severe anxiety, paranoia, delusions, and psychosis are always possible, particularly for those predisposed to mental disorders such as schizophrenia. It is highly advised to use harm reduction practices if using this substance. For anyone curious, I am reading this from the Psychonaut wiki. This is an incredible source for all things drug or substance related. This is like if people who were familiar with the scene actually wrote a wiki about all of this. So, there is a lot more information here than there would be on normal Wikipedia. Hence, the common names. Let's see here. Any interesting information? So psychoactive class is psychedelic. Let's see here. Warning, always start with lower doses due to differences between individual body weight, tolerance, metabolism, and personal sensitivity. Just for, the stupid legal side of this, this channel is not promoting the use of such a substance, especially by anyone who is not 18 years or older. But I feel as though my audience is smart enough that they can do their own research. And if anyone does decide to partake, just be safe. Make sure I have a trip sitter. Let's see here. So there is a dosing chart here. Like I said, there's definitely a lot more information here than there would be on any other. Let's see, let's turn this off so you can actually see the dosing chart. So one thing it didn't really mention is that LSD is such a active substance that it has to be measured in micrograms. So, I mean, that's, if anyone knows the dose of or the size of a microgram, it's It's really small. So bioavailability 71%. Let's see, threshold 15 micrograms. A light dose. Let's see. So 15 to 75, common 75 to 150, strong 150 to 300, and heavy 300 plus. Duration total 8 to 12 hours. The onset 15 to 30 minutes. The come up 45 to 90 minutes. The peak will last anywhere between 3 to 5 hours. The offset 3 to 5 hours. After effects 12 to 48 hours. Interactions. This is also another cool part about this website is, gives you safe use information. So let's see, cannabis and stimulants, not a good idea to intermix, but can be done, usually is done. In fact, was done by CIA scientists, both mixed stimulants, particularly speed, and cannabis with LSD when they were messing with it in the laboratory. Tramadol, not really sure what this is. Go look real quick. Oh, okay. Trililic and antidepressants, ritonavir, or lithium is actually, looks like it's poisonous. So if you took LSD and lithium together, it could possibly result in death. That is incredibly interesting. So real quick, we're going to dive into a little bit of history and culture here. If there is anything interesting, I haven't read this far down. The original synthesis of LSD was recorded on November 16th, 1938 by the Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann while employed at the Sandoz laboratories in Basel, Switzerland. The compound was synthesized as part of a large research program searching for medically useful derivatives of ergot, a fungus that grows on rye and other grains. However, it was not discovered to be psychoactive until 5 years later, when Hoffman claimed to have accidentally ingested an unknown quantity of the chemical before proceeding to ride his bike home. Apparently, the first LSD trip ever in history happened by a scientist on a bike, riding his bike home from work to his house. Apparently, he would travel home with a friend or work partner, and apparently, when he ingested this, because mind you, he did not know it was psychoactive at this point. So he's riding his bike home, and apparently he said it felt like almost a year, but it took like 15 minutes. And also, apparently, he rode his bike incredibly slow, based upon what the partner said at the time. The first intentional ingestion was recorded on April 19th. Weird. Any of the fans in the audience who's familiar with a lot of topics that we cover, or topics that other people other similar topics know that a lot of things have happened on April 19th. So April 19th, 1943, the first intentional ingestion recorded of LSD. Hoffman ingested 250 micrograms of LSD, believing it would be a threshold dose based on the doses of other ergot alkaloids. He found the effects to be much stronger than he anticipated and was impressed by the profound, mind-altering effects. April 19th is now celebrated annually as bicycle day. That I did not know. Let's see here. In 1947, Sandoz introduced LSD to the medical community under the name Delicid, marketing it as an experimental tool to introduce temporary psychotic-like states of normals or model psychosis, and later to enhance the psychotherapeutic treatments. The substance had a major impact upon its release within 15 years. Research on LSD and other hallucinogens generated over 1,000 scientific papers and was prescribed to over 40,000 patients. In the 1950s, the U.S. Had to just get that out of the way. In the 1950s, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency created a research program codenamed MK Ultra. Let's see where that leads, if that's actually just Wikipedia. Yep, just Wikipedia. Okay, so that would conduct clandestine research investigating LSD for applications in mind control and chemical warfare. Experiments included administering the substance to CIA employees, military personnel, doctors, prostitutes, mentally ill patients, and members of the general public without their knowledge. Let's see here. Okay, just making sure, checking on everything real quick. We all good? Good. Okay. Mentally ill patients and members of the general public without their knowledge or consent, which resulted in at least one death. It was actually more. Okay. Let's see. In 1963, the Sandoz patents for LSD expired. So several prominent intellectuals, including Aldous Huxley, Timothy Leary, Al Hubbard, and Alan Watts, began to advocate for the mass consumption of LSD, according to L.R. Vaisley. They profoundly influenced the thinking of the new generation of youth. LSD became a central, highly visible feature of the youth-driven counterculture of the 1960s, provoking widespread controversy and backlash in American civil society. On October 24th, 1968, LSD possession was made illegal in the United States. The last FDA-approved study in patients ended in 1980, while a study in healthy volunteers was made in the late 1980s. Legality approved and regulated psychiatric use of LSD continued in Switzerland until 1993. So, yeah, LSD is incredibly studied. It is, a lot is known about it. It's not like some of these other drugs, but nonetheless, I do think that this takes us into what we wanted to cover today. So a lot of it's going to be LSD related, but now we're working our way over to MK Ultra. So give me just a moment. Let's see if there are any questions in the chat or any questions that anyone has. Feel free to pop them in there. We'll go over them, or if I already know the answer, we'll just go over that. Let's see here. So I know I had a good source for this, but maybe we'll have to do that later. Let's see. This is where we will be jumping into drugs as weapons against us. So let's see here. Give me just a moment. So anyone watching, let me throw a question out there for anybody. Anyone watching, have you taken LSD? And if you have, what was your experience like? While I'm looking for this, um, let's see here. Maybe I can bring up a book. Um, I personally have taken LSD. Um, it was definitely fun. I don't regret it. I wouldn't do it today, I don't think. Um, I don't have any I don't have any like I wouldn't recommend anyone else take it. Mainly just because of like where it came from, the potential for harm that can be done. Um, I do think it's going to equal more negative than positive. Um, let's see here. Okay. Um, I mean, for psychedelic, obviously they need to be done in the correct way. They need to be respected. This is not just something to toy around with. This is not, it's not a toy, literally. Um, I think that they do have their place in society. I do think that they can definitely help with certain ailments. PTSD has had or people studying PTSD have seen a profound positive effect when administered correctly, not with just LSD, but mushrooms. Um, but I just wouldn't recommend it. I mean, it does fry your brain, literally, which is, one of the nicknames of fry. You are frying on acid because it is cooking your brain, so to speak. So I wouldn't recommend it. I, you know, Nobody ever respects these things as I think how they should be. It's not a drug that should be used recreationally. It's like I said, it's not a toy. But if you have a reason, um, a legitimate reason, I think it could benefit. Um, but it needs to be administered correctly, um, and not toyed around with by a bunch of high school students. Um, but I mean, hallucinogens, and just stick with mushrooms. Mushrooms are funner. They're a lot funner. Um, then you don't have all this baggage that comes along with LSD and MK Ultra and all this stuff. But um, so let's get into this. Like I said, this is an excerpt from Drugs as Weapons Against Us by John L. Potash. For anyone who is curious, let's see here. Okay, so how the CIA used LSD as a weapon. Let's see. I'm trying to find a comfortable position for me to be able to read this. So, let's see here. Okay. Sorry, the first time I've ever read a book on screen or on live, so this is definitely a little new. And yeah, we'll be getting into Laurel Canyon and stuff, but I do think that a lot of this background is necessary to get a full understanding for those who are definitely unfamiliar. Quote, 76 LSD subjects, 24% of 320 reported one or more long-term adverse reaction to LSD exposure. U.S. Army, 1980. All complaints from subjects were reported to adverse effects, even though these events had occurred on average 19 years earlier. That was a quote from U.S. Army Medical Department, U.S. Army Health Services Command, Project Director LTC, David A. McFarling, MC. This document is called the LSD Follow-Up Study Report, October 1980. Which reminds me, Project MK Ultra was the CIA's umbrella name for at least several projects that used psychedelic drugs against the enemies of the American ruling oligarchy. Okay, sorry, just getting something loaded up in the background. This was revealed by Martin Lee and Bruce Shallon, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, who interviewed hundreds of people and read thousands of declassified documents, books, and articles for their book, Acid Dreams, The Complete Social History of LSD, the CIA, the 60s, and beyond. Although CIA Director Richard Helms destroyed all of the CIA's MK Ultra files in 1973, most of them, we only have like 1% of what was actually available. Sorry. He missed the financial department's files. Of course he did. It is those files and other source material that provided Lee, Shallon, and other researchers like John Marks with information on this project, which is basically what we work from today. That and the work of these researchers. One researcher, Professor Alfred McCoy, the author of The Politics of Heroin, later wrote about the CIA's project that led up to MK Ultra. His book, A Question of Torture, McCoy wrote that Dr. Kurt Planter and other Nazi scientists tested mescaline on concentration camp prisoners during World War II. The New York Times wrote that the U.S. Justice Department printed a 600-page secret report in 2006 about U.S. government's operations, saving Plotner and other thousands of other Nazis. Of course, it's referencing Operation Paperclip. Let's see here. Okay. Writers such as retired Air Force Colonel Walter Boyne, a former director of Washington's Air and Space Museum, wrote an Air Force magazine article about Project Paperclip, better known as Operation Paperclip, that saved at least 700 Nazi scientists. The Joint Chiefs of Staff stated these operations in 1945, started these operations in 1945, and the CIA continued them, saving what was originally estimated as 10,000 Nazis from various professionals through the Justice Department, or though the Justice Department report found a somewhat lower number of Nazis saved, the operations gave these Nazis employment in the U.S. government, ostensibly to fight communism during the Cold War. It's like, okay, so we kicked your butt, and now we're going to go take on the commies. It's like, okay, like, oh, geez, whatever justification, Let's see here. Trying to get this pulled up in the background, and it's not working. So Hank Albarelli Jr., a veteran journalist who also had served in President Jimmy Carter's administration, wrote several articles as well as a book about Operation Paperclip and MK Ultra, exposing the fact that the fact that the operation transferred over 1,600 Nazi scientists to the U.S. to work in the former Brookshaven Nuclear Laboratory and on Plum Island, the site of biological weapon experiments. Allegedly, that's where Lyme disease came from. Let's see here. Nazi scientists brought with them their research on psychedelics into offices shared with CIA scientists. They also regularly met with Swiss Sandoz scientist Albert Hofmann. The many inhumane exploits of these Nazi scientists who later worked in MK Ultra programs are well known. CIA employed Nazi scientists Herbert Gertzner had programmatically killed German children. America's father of space medicine, Hubertus Stronghold, tested psychedelics on concentration camp victims at Dachau, and he conducted experiments that involved shooting victims, injecting them with gasoline, crushing them to death, and freezing them to death in ice water. Let's see. In 1938, Albert Hofmann created LSD while working for Swiss company Sandoz. We went through that. Let's see here. Let me try something else. Let's see. Aha. It does work. Okay. Sorry, give me just a second. Trying to make sure that we can keep moving the show forward. Okay. Perfect. You know, this is rather kind of annoying to read a book like this. Like, I'm going to have to work on a setup to make sure that this is more streamlined. Anyways, let's see here. In 1943, Albert Hofmann tried his first experience on LSD on unwitting patients at a Swiss hospital. He then experimented on university students and laboratory workers. At least one of them committed suicide by jumping from a high window. Let's see. A later independent commission of experts in Switzerland found that Sandoz, as well as the Swiss pharmaceutical company Ciba, C-I-B-A, Ciba, acted in collaboration with IG Farben in Nazi atrocities. During World War II, Farben fired all the Jews employed in its companies and replaced them with the Nazi supporters. They also collaborated with the manufacturing of Zyklon B and other lethal gases used in concentration camps. Let's see. Gordon Wesson, who had been working as a vice president of J.P. Morgan and Company, reported that he and several scientists began working for the CIA several years later after it had formed. He would travel the world with CIA scientists in search of poisonous and psychedelic mushrooms that they gathered and sent to Albert Hofmann at Sandoz. The CIA employed American and former Nazi scientists and started Operation Bluebird, which used drugs, electroshock, hypnosis, and psychosurgery to control people during interrogation. Dr. Charles Savage headed this program at the Naval Medical Research Institute in Bethesda, Maryland. The U.S. Army made former Nazi Friedrich Hoffmann, no relation to Albert, the chief of agents, drugs, is agents, chief of agents at Maryland's Edgewood Chemical Arsenal, where 7 other former Nazi scientists also worked. Hoffman, Dr. Savage, and fellow scientists gave LSD to unknowing soldiers at Edgewood in the 1950s. They then coupled the LSD with other techniques in a project called Artichoke. Their experiments, including keeping prisoners who were drug treatment patients in Lexington, Kentucky, trapped, or they would keep them, the patients in Lexington, Kentucky, they would keep them tripping for 77 days straight. Good Lord. Whew. The U.S. Army also worked with the CIA in running similar experiments in the chemical warfare laboratories, sharing their research with British and Canadian scientists. The CIA claimed they researched LSD because of the unverified report that the Soviet Union had bought up the world's supply. However, only 3 months before, CIA Director Helms had said the Soviets were 5 years behind the U.S. in LSD research. Yeah, but that doesn't matter. Let's just make up that the Soviets did it, and then we can be justified in everything that we do. Let's see here. Similarly, a group of conservative politicians formed the Committee on the Present Danger and propagandized the myth of Soviet technical superiority in nuclear weapons. They warned of imminent danger from a Soviet Union nuclear attack. In reality, the Soviet Union developed nuclear arms years after the U.S. The Soviet arsenal never came close to the size of America's. The CIA also falsely claimed the Russians might put LSD in the U.S. water supply. In fact, it was the CIA that researched and successfully found a way to make LSD work in the water supply. Go figure. MK Ultra widens use of LSD and other drug weapons. Within several years, the CIA combined many of its mind-altering drug programs under the title MK Ultra. At the time, future CIA Director Richard Helms was an assistant deputy in charge of covert operations and supervised Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who ran the program. Gottlieb had worked on other projects that obtained substances from the U.S. Army Special Operations, and he continued to direct the testing of LSD and other substances as potential incapacitants, and for the purpose of assassination. 2 other areas of MK Ultra focus included cancer-causing compounds and radiation warfare, the latter of which was almost completely blocked out of CIA documents. The CIA put LSD in the drinks of thousands of unsuspecting people from the 1950s onwards. Jonathan Marks, director of the Bureau of Intelligence and Research at the U.S. State Department, described how the CIA started dosing individuals in 1952. The CIA leaders came from some of the wealthiest families. They are considered leftist, their political opponents. The CIA eventually would develop a hit list of leftist leaders to dose, damage, and discredit, presumably with an extremely large amount of LSD at one time. Go figure. Let's see here. As will be discussed in more detail, one of the largest populations of saved Nazis was in Argentina. Go figure. Syracuse University math professor William A. Pierce was targeted by the CIA's MK Ultra for speaking out against McCarthy-era purging of leftist academics. Yeah, I believe that we owe McCarthy an apology, but that's just me. Pierce's math department chair fired 2 members of his department for alleged activities in controversial political groups. Pierce said he was considered a left-winger due to, quote, partly to my membership in peace groups and opposition to the Cold War, but it was primarily my criticism of FBI investigations, end quote. The House Un-American Activities Committee investigated Professor Pierce. Pierce moved to Oklahoma State University, where he published a letter criticizing unreasonable psychiatric hospitalizations. Oh no, what a monster. A few days later, a police officer and sheriff's deputy arrested Pierce for false reasons, involuntarily committed Pierce and placed him under the care of influential Dr. Lewis Jolin West. Pierce would never teach again. Go figure. Go fucking figure. By 1953, the CIA had ordered 10 kilos of LSD from Sandoz for $240,000. Having already tested LSD many times since 1949, the CIA knew this supply offered 100 million doses. The CIA asked Eli Lilly Pharmaceutical Company to try to synthesize LSD. By mid-1954, Eli Lilly broke Sandoz's formula and assured the CIA that in a matter of months, LSD would be available in quantities. Let's see. U.S. intelligence super spy Captain Alfred Hubbard served with the CIA Forerunner Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS. Hubbard worked with British psychiatrist Humphrey Osmond in experiments with LSD and mescaline on patients in Canada, even though Hubbard had no medical or scientific credentials. Doesn't matter. Just handle this new super psychoactive chemical compound. I mean, you don't need a medical license for that. By 1953, psychiatrists had begun using LSD across North America, utilizing low doses on patients in special mental health treatment centers. Soon, similar LSD centers sprung up in Germany, Holland, France, Italy, Czechoslovakia, and some other Scandinavian countries. Dr. Osmond used large doses of LSD on patients at Weyburn Hospital in Canada, reportedly to cure their alcoholism. Hubbard opened 3 treatment centers in Canada for the same purpose. The centers claimed a 50% success rate and begun using high-dose treatment with LSD in the U.S. Whether their 50% success rate was true or not, later medical reviews said it wasn't. Hubbard and Osmond had other plans with LSD or acid. They said they wanted to transform the belief system of world leaders to further the cause of world peace. Their actual goal appeared the same as U.S. intelligence employers, to damage leftist leaders' minds and increase American rulers' global dominance. Dr. Humphrey Osmond coined the term psychedelic, meaning mind manifesting. Osmond's work to popularize acid led him to enlist Brave New World author Aldous Huxley as a proponent of psychedelics. Brave New World, published in 1932, was listed by many literary organizations as one of the most important novels of the century. Osmond first gave mescaline to Huxley in May of 1953. Huxley wrote about the experience in The Doors of Perception. Osmond continued his LSD experiments at Princeton University. While Huxley worked on another book, Hubbard supplied him with his second mescaline trip before introducing LSD later in the year. Captain Hubbard impressed Huxley with his connections to the top echelons of American business and government, which Huxley believed was due partly to Hubbard's fortune made as a uranium entrepreneur. Huxley promoted psychedelics in his last book, despite the themes of Brave New World, which warned of rulers keeping people content with their lot through the use of escapist drugs. Let's see here. Just make sure. Okay. Dr. Ewan Cameron, which we will be diving into him a lot more at a later date. I believe he deserves an entire an entire show just on him alone. Dr. Ewan Cameron, an important Canadian academic working with LSD, had headed the Canadian American and World Psychiatric Associations before his death. While working at McGill University, Cameron administered LSD in frequent doses and delivered massive electroshock treatment in conjunction with reportedly playing tape-recorded messages to de-pattern and then recondition people he diagnosed with schizophrenia. Cameron also injected LSD into patients with depression and put them through electroshock treatment many times at far higher doses than was standard. Dr. Cameron's methods were later discredited, and 9 of his subjects sued the American government for $1 million each when it was learned that Cameron had been working with the CIA's MK Ultra program. Plaintiffs said they never agreed to participate in Cameron's scientific experiments and still suffered from the trauma up into the 1990s. The CIA settled out of court for substantial amounts of money. One of Cameron's victims was the wife of a prominent Jewish leftist politician, David Orkolau. After Orkolau's wife, Val, gave birth to their daughter, she suffered from postpartum depression. The Winnipeg Free Press described what happened next. She was sent to Montreal for several treatment stints, totaling 3 years. Under the care of psychiatrist Ewan Cameron, she was made an unwitting guinea pig in secret brainwashing experiments financed by the CIA that used frequent shock treatments at far stronger than standard levels. She was the subject of 14 experiments with LSD. The damage to her mind was permanent. Let's see. Oh, come on. Stupid mouse. Okay, so while we were on that subject and transitioning, so I mean, this is all part of this larger story that we will be covering. Let's see. So let's see here. I think it's this one. I think it's this one. So give me just a sec to get this pulled up. Yes, this is it. Okay. So we're going to watch little video real quick as we transition to the next part of this. We are not done with drugs as weapons against us, but we are just kind of going to be bouncing to kind of give the full picture of all of this. So let me see, pop over here. Let's see, this should be
I was given a glass of Kool-Aid, and so were the other children. This Kool-Aid was spiked with LSD. It was horrible.
In the early days of the Cold War, the CIA ordered the creation of a secret program intended to find ways of mind control. They funded an army of psychiatric institutions across the United States and Canada to perform experiments on unsuspecting patients using psychedelic drugs, sensory deprivation, electroshock treatment, and more. The program was known by its codename, MK Ultra. At the end of the Korean War, a number of freed American POWs came home seemingly brainwashed and espousing communist propaganda. American officials suspected that the soldiers had been subjected to what they thought were new communist mind.
Really need to cover that. We've covered that a bunch, so let's just skip ahead.
Basically studied.
These parties were called acid tests, and the culture that grew out of them played in practice was the hosting.
Basically studied.
Oh, hey, look, it's our best friend, Tom O'Neill. Isn't that interesting? We'll be discussing more on him later as well. Oh, come on. See, he just fucked up the whole stream. Just kidding.
They established what were called safe houses, where prostitutes would lure men to these apartments. And then once the men were in the apartments, they were dosed with LSD. And then they were basically studied by CIA scientists, usually behind a two-way mirror.
Another common practice was the hosting and observing of LSD-induced parties with live music. These parties were called acid tests, and the culture that grew out of them played a key role in the development of the hippie and psychedelic movements a few years later. However, some of the most damaging experiments occurred at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada. There, under the direction of infamous Scottish-American psychiatrist Dr. Ewan Cameron, unsuspecting patients, many of whom had common ailments such as postpartum depression, were experimented on with aggressive drug cocktails and extreme techniques.
My father was a victim of Dr. Cameron. He was a 27-year-old, healthy skier, canoeer, very athletic, and he had asthma. They told him if he went to the Allen Memorial, they could cure his asthma.
My father, Charles, was a patient of Dr. Cameron's. He had a trigeminal neuralgia, it's called, where there's a pain in the temple that radiates into the jaw that apparently is excruciatingly painful. They told him that it was psychosomatic, which it's not, but in those days, what did they know? So they sent him to a shrink. This shrink that he went to was working with Cameron, although we didn't know. So he put my father right into the program.
I was having trouble with my parents. My father and my stepmother decided to put me in the Allen Memorial Institute. They had no idea what went on in there. I was 16 when I was there.
Dr. Cameron pursued a concept he called depatterning, which was meant to reduce patients to an infantile psychological state wherein doctors could take advantage of the person's cognitive vulnerability to attempt to rebuild their mind under the doctor's control. A popular method of choice to achieve this was called psychic driving.
The day that my father was brought to the hospital, they immediately put him on insulin, to put him into like an insulin coma. They took clips from the interview with the shrink and put it on tape to run a loop under his pillow while he was put into this sleep treatment.
He also was put in an insulin coma for 36 days with a recording beside him saying that your mother hates you. over and over and over and over and over.
That was beside my bed constantly, repeated 250,000 and 500,000 times.
Another common method was the use of extreme Page-Russell electroshock therapy.
Page-Russell shock treatment is approximately 40 to 75 times the strength of a normal shock treatment. So it's really designed to wipe out the memory.
He received 54 high voltage shock treatments, followed by 54 grand mal seizures.
After 27 days of this, they said that they were discouraged because he still had ties to his former life, in that he was asking to see his wife. They decided to give him more Page-Russell shock treatments and put him to sleep for another 30 days.
When patients were released from the Allen Memorial, they and their families' lives would never be the same again.
Well, there's a lot I could not remember after I got out of the Allen. When my family came, I was a zombie. I didn't even know who they were.
He never came out the same. He had a blank look in his eye. He didn't know who we were. He didn't know we were his daughters. He lost his job. We went into poverty after he came out.
He had said in his interview with the shrink that I was the apple of his eye. And after he came home, he started beating me not long after.
In 1973, the MK Ultra program was terminated, and some of the evidence of its activities was systematically erased.
The whole thing was basically
I mean, they say it was ended, but anyone who's watched the show before, or anyone who knows much of anything, they didn't end it. Well, okay. There is a very clear distinction here. So MK Ultra did end, okay? There is no argumentation about that. Because MK Ultra was simply just the research and development of these programs. So MK Ultra did end, although, you know, there was MK Search, MK Delta, MK Naomi, all did. They were all under the MK umbrella. However, they were they had different goals for each MK project. But all they did is they took what they learned in MK Ultra and just switched it to a different focus. This is when they started focusing on cults, started producing cults such as the SLA, the Symbionese Liberation Army. They, of course, put their focus on places like Jonestown, which we've covered before. But the testing didn't really end. It just moved to the next phase. So MK Ultra did end. They just called it something else. They broke it down, recompartmentalized everything, and split up the focus, gave it to different doctors, and moved it into the next phase of research and development.
Discovered because of a whistleblower named John Marks, who wrote the first book really about the program called The Search for the Manchurian Candidate. There were congressional hearings here in the United States in the mid-70s after it had been exposed. And during those hearings, the CIA finally admitted that this program existed. They admitted that it was probably not the right thing to do, but they feigned innocence.
Despite the congressional hearings and marginal interest in the subject in popular culture, most MK Ultra survivors suffered in silence, taking their trauma with them to the grave. Today, having received no formal apology or compensation, the children of some survivors are pursuing a class action lawsuit against the institutions they deem responsible.
You know, the CIA knew that it was breaking, you know, every moral, ethical, and legal law in the books to do these experiments.
They all were behind it. They all knew what they were doing, but they weren't doing it out of care or love. They were doing it out of military and political reasons.
I am on medication now because of what happened to me when I was 16. I have not had any compensation or apology. I want everyone to know in Canada what went on in that horrible, horrible hospital.
While historians and survivors have exposed MK Ultra's exploits to the world, much remains unknown about its extent and wider impact. Given the highly sensitive nature of the program's activity, it is likely this will remain the case for years to come.
So now we've kind of given a good overview. For those interested, I will be doing like a proper overview of this at a later date. But for today's purpose, I feel as though we've reached a proper overview. Now, skipping ahead, there is a lot more we could go into, but for today's topic, let's get to it. It's about damn time, right? Okay, so the Center for Informed America. This is David McGowan's website. I highly recommend this website for anyone interested in these topics. Absolutely incredible stuff. And rest in peace, David McGowan. He was an incredible source, and it is incredibly unfortunate. He had passed away. I would love to see what he would be doing today if he was still around. However, his daughter works incredibly hard keeping his memory alive and his website up and rolling. So we will be jumping into part 1 of his Laurel Canyon series, and this is what we're gonna close out on for today. But we are gonna cover this real quick. So, inside the LC, the strange but mostly true story of Laurel Canyon and the birth of the hippie generation, Part 1, by David McGowan, May 8th, 2008. There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. Boy howdy if that ain't true. Join me now, if you have the time, as we take a stroll down memory lane to a time nearly 4.5 decades ago, a time when America last had uniformed ground troops fighting a sustained and bloody battle to impose democracy on a foreign nation, or sovereign nation, sorry. Let's see. It is the first week of August 1964, and U.S. warships under the command of U.S. Navy Admiral George Stephen Morrison have allegedly come under attack while patrolling Vietnam's Tonkin Gulf. This event, subsequently dubbed the Tonkin Gulf Incident, will result in the immediate passing by the U.S. Congress of the obviously pre-drafted Tonkin Gulf Resolution, which will, in turn, quickly lead to America's deep immersion into the bloody Vietnam quagmire. Before it is over, well over 50,000 American bodies, along with literally millions of Southeast Asian bodies, will litter the battlefields of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. For the record, the Tonkin Gulf incident appears to differ somewhat from other alleged provocations that have driven this country to war. This was not, as we have seen so many times before, a false flag operation, which is to say an operation that involves Uncle Sam attacking himself and then pointing an accusatory finger at someone else. It was also not, as we have also seen on more than one occasion, an attack that was quite deliberately provoked. No, what the Tonkin Gulf incident actually was, as it turns out, is an attack that never took place at all. The entire incident has been all but officially acknowledged, was spun from whole cloth. It is quite possible, however, that the incident was, the intent was to provoke a defensive response, which could then be cast as an unprovoked attack on U.S. warships. The ships in question were on an intelligence mission and were operating in a decidedly provocative manner. It is quite possible that when Vietnamese forces failed to respond as anticipated, Uncle Sam decided to just pretend as though they had. Nevertheless, by early February 1965, the U.S. will, without a declaration of war and with no valid reason to wage one, begin indiscriminately bombing North Vietnam. By March of that same year, the infamous Operation Rolling Thunder will have commenced. Over the course of the next 3.5 years, millions of tons of bombs, missiles, rockets, incendiary devices, and chemical warfare agents will be dumped on the people of Vietnam in what can only be described as one of the worst crimes against humanity ever perpetrated on this planet. Also in March of 1965, the first uniformed U.S. soldier will officially step foot on Vietnamese soil, although Special Forces units masquerading as advisors and trainers had been there for at least 4 years, and likely much longer. By April 1965, fully 25,000 uniformed American kids, most still teenagers, barely out of high school, will be slogging through the rice paddies of Vietnam. By the end of that year, U.S. troop strength will have surged to 200,000. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the world, in those early months of 1965, a new scene is just beginning to take shape in the city of Los Angeles. In a geographically and socially isolated community known as Laurel Canyon. A heavily wooded, rustic, serene, yet vaguely ominous slice of LA nestled in the hills that separate the Los Angeles basin from the San Fernando Valley. Musicians, singers, and songwriters suddenly began to gather as though summoned there by some unseen Pied Piper. Within months, the hippie / flower child movement will be given birth there, along with the new style of music that will provide the soundtrack to the tumultuous second half of the 1960s. An uncanny number of rock music superstars will emerge from Laurel Canyon beginning in the mid-1960s and carrying through the decade of the 1970s. The first to drop an album will be the Byrds, whose biggest star will prove to be David Crosby. The band's debut effort, Mr. Tambourine Man, will be released on the summer solstice of 1965. It will quickly be followed by releases from the John Phillips led Mamas and the Papas. If You Can't Believe Your Eyes and Ears, January 1966. Love with Arthur Lee, Love, May 1966. Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, Freak Out, June 1966. Buffalo Springfields, featuring Stephen Stills and Neil Young, Buffalo Springfield, October 1966. And The Doors, January 1967. One of the earliest of the Laurel Canyon / Sunset Strip scene, one of the earliest on the Laurel Canyon Sunset Strip scene is Jim Morrison, the enigmatic lead singer of The Doors. Jim will quickly become one of the most iconic, controversial, critically acclaimed, and influential figures to take up residence in Laurel Canyon. Curiously enough, though, the self-proclaimed Lizard King, which, can I just say, it is fucking weird to give yourself a nickname. Don't give yourself a nickname. Somebody else has got to give you a nickname. Red flag number 1. The self-proclaimed Lizard King has another claim to fame as well, albeit the one that his numerous chroniclers will feel is of much relevance to his career and possible ultimately death. He is the son, as it turns out, of the aforementioned Admiral George Stephen Morrison. And so it is that, even while the father is actively conspiring to fabricate an incident that will be used to massively accelerate an illegal war. The Sun is positioning himself to become an icon of the hippie anti-war crowd. Nothing unusual about that, I suppose. It is, a small world and all that. And it is not as if Jim Morrison's story is in any way unique. During the early years of its heyday, Laurel Canyon's father figure is the rather eccentric personality known as Frank Zappa. Though he and his various mothers of invention lineups will never attain the commercial success of the band headed by the Admiral's son, Frank will be a hugely influential figure among his contemporaries. Ensconced in an abode dubbed the Log Cabin, which sat right at the heart of Laurel Canyon at the crossroads of Laurel Canyon Boulevard and Lookout Mountain Avenue. Zappa will play host to virtually every musician who passes through the canyon in the mid to late 1960s. He will also discover and sign numerous acts to his various Laurel Canyon-based record labels. Many of these acts will be rather bizarre and somewhat obscure characters. Think Captain Beefheart and Larry Wildman Fisher. But some of them, such as psychedelic rocker, come shock rocker Alice Cooper, will go on to superstardom. Zappa, along with certain members of his sizable entourage. The Log Cabin was run by an early commune, with numerous hangers-on occupying various rooms in the main house and the guest house, as well as in the peculiar caves and tunnels lacing the grounds of the home. Far from the quaint homestead the name seems to imply. By the way, the Log Cabin was a cavernous 5-level home that featured a 2,000 square foot living room with 3 massive chandeliers and an enormous floor-to-ceiling stone fireplace. Will also be instrumental in introducing the look and attitude that will define the hippie counterculture. Although the Zappa crew preferred the label freak. Nevertheless, Zappa, born curiously enough in the winter solstice of 1940, never really made a secret of the fact that he had nothing but contempt for the hippie culture that he helped create and that he surrounded himself with. Given that Zappa was, by numerous accounts, a rigidly authoritarian control freak and a supporter of U.S. military actions in Southeast Asia, it is perhaps not surprising that he would not feel a kinship with the youth movement that he helped nurture. And it is possibly safe to say that Frank's dad also had little regard for the youth culture of the 1960s, given that Francis Zappa was, in case you were wondering, a chemical warfare specialist assigned to, where else? The Edgewood Arsenal. Edgewood is, of course, the longtime home of America's chemical warfare program, as well as a facility frequently cited as being deeply enmeshed in MK Ultra operations. Curiously enough, Frank Zappa literally grew up at the Edgewood Arsenal, having lived the first 7 years of his life in military housing on the grounds of the facility. The family later moved to Lancaster, California, near Edwards Air Force Base, where Francis Zappa continued to busy himself with doing classified work for the military/intelligence complex. His son, meanwhile, prepped himself to become an icon of the peace and love crowd. Again, nothing unusual about that, I suppose. Zappa's manager, by the way, is a shadowy character by the name of Herb Cohen, who had come out to LA from the Bronx with his brother Mutt just before the music and club scene began heating up. Cohen, a former U.S. Marine, had spent a few years traveling the world before his arrival on the Laurel Canyon scene. Those travels, curiously, had taken him to the Congo in 1961, At the very time that leftist Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba was being tortured and killed by our very own CIA. Not to worry though. According to one of Zappa's biographers, Cohen wasn't in the Congo on some kind of nefarious intelligence mission. No. He was there, believe it or not, to supply arms to Lumumba in defiance of the CIA because, that is the kind of thing that globe-trotting ex-Marines did in those days, as we'll see soon enough when we take a look at another Laurel Canyon luminary. Making up the other half of Laurel Canyon's first family is Frank's wife, Gail Zappa, known formerly as Adele Slotman. Gail hails from the long line of career naval officers, including her father, who spent his life working on classified nuclear weapons research for the U.S. Navy. Gail herself had once worked as secretary for the Office of Naval Research and Development. She also once told an interviewer that she had heard voices all her life. Many years before their nearly simultaneous arrival in Laurel Canyon, Gail had attended a naval kindergarten with Mr. Mojo Rising himself, Jim Morrison. It is claimed that as children, Gail once hit Jim over the head with a hammer. I think that explains quite a bit. The very same Jim Morrison, who later attended the same Alexandria, Virginia high school as two other future Laurel Canyon luminaries, John Phillips and Cass Elliot. Papa John Phillips, more so than probably any other illustrious residents of Laurel Canyon, will play a major role in spreading the emerging youth counterculture across America. His contribution will be twofold. First, he will co-organize, along with Manson associate Terry Melcher, the famed Monterey Pop Festival, which through unprecedented media exposure, which is incredibly strange how much exposure they got. Well, I guess it's not so strange once we get further in. Will give mainstream America its first real look at the music and fashions of the nascent hippie movement. Second, Phillips will pen an insipid song known as San Francisco, Be Sure to Wear Flowers in Your Hair, which will quickly rise to the top of the charts, along with the Monterey Pop Festival. I don't know why I'm struggling with that today. The song will be instrumental in luring the disenfranchised, a preponderance of whom are underage runaways, by the underage, to San Francisco to create the Haight-Ashbury phenomenon and the famed 1967 Summer of Love. Before arriving in Laurel Canyon and opening the doors to his home to the soon-to-be famous, the already famous, and the infamous, such as the aforementioned Charlie Manson, whose family also spent time at the log cabin and at the Laurel Canyon home of Mama Cass Elliot, which, in case you didn't know, sat right across the street from the Laurel Canyon home of Abigail Fulcher and Wojtek Frykowski. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. John Edmund Andrew Phillips was shockingly enough yet another child of the military intelligence complex, the son of U.S. Marine Corps Captain Claude Andrew Phillips and a mother who claimed to have psychic and telekinetic powers. John attended a series of elite military prep schools in Washington, D.C. area, culminating in an appointment to the prestigious U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis. After leaving Annapolis, John married Susie Adams, a direct descendant of founding father John Adams. Susie's father, James Adams Jr., had been involved in what Susie described as cloak and dagger stuff with the Air Force of Vienna, or what we like to call covert intelligence operations. Susie herself would later find employment at alongside John Phillips' older sister, Rosie, who dutifully reported to work at the complex for nearly 30 years. John's mother, Dane Phillips, also worked for most of her life for the federal government in some unspecified capacity. And John's older brother, Tommy, was a battle-scarred former U.S. Marine who worked as a cop on the Alexandria police force, albeit one with a disciplinary record for exhibiting a violent streak when dealing with people of color. Yeah, well, they're all racist pieces of shit, so no surprise there. John Phillips, of course, though surrounded throughout his life by military intelligence personnel, did not involve himself in such matters, or so we're to believe. Before succeeding in his musical career, however, John did seem to find himself quite innocently, of course, in some rather unusual places. One such place was Havana, Cuba, where Phillips arrived at the very height of the Cuban Revolution. For the record, Phillips has claimed that he went to Havana as nothing more than a concerned private citizen, with the intention of, you're going to love this one, fighting for Castro. Because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of folks in those days traveled abroad to thwart CIA operations before taking up residence in Laurel Canyon and joining the hippie generation. During the 2 weeks or so that the Cuban Missile Crisis played out, a few years after Castro took power, Phillips found himself cooling his heels in Jacksonville, Florida, alongside, coincidentally, I'm sure, the Mayport Naval Station. Anyways, let's move on to yet another Laurel Canyon's earliest and brightest stars, Mr. Stephen Stills. Stills will have the distinction of being a founding member of two of Laurel Canyon's most acclaimed and beloved bands, Buffalo Springfield, and needless to say, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. In addition, Stills will pen perhaps the first and certainly one of the most enduring anthems of the 1960s generation, For What It's Worth, the opening line of which appear at the top of this post. Stills' follow-up single will be entitled Bluebird, which, coincidentally or not, happens to be the original codename assigned to the MK Ultra program. Before his arrival in Laurel Canyon, Stephen Stills was Yawn, the product of yet another career military family. Raised partly in Texas, young Stephen spent large swaths of his childhood in El Salvador, Costa Rica, the Panama Canal Zone, and various other parts of Central America, alongside his father, who was, we can be fairly certain, helping to spread democracy to the unwashed masses in the endangeringly American way. As with the rest of our cast of characters, Stills was educated primarily at schools on military bases and at elite military academies. Along with his contemporaries in Laurel Canyon, he was widely viewed as having an abrasive authoritarian personality. Nothing unusual about any of that, of course, as we have already seen with the rest of our cast of characters. There is, however, an even more curious aspect of Stephen Stills' story. Stephen will later tell anyone who will sit and listen that he had served time for Uncle Sam in the jungles of Vietnam. These tales will be universally dismissed by chroniclers of the era as nothing more than drug-induced delusions. Such a thing couldn't possibly be true. It will be claimed, since Stills arrived on the Laurel Canyon scene at the very time that the first uniformed troops began shipping out, that he remained in the public eye thereafter. And it will, of course, be quite true that Stephen Stills could not have served with uniformed ground troops in Vietnam, But what will be ignored is the undeniable fact that the U.S. had thousands of advisors, which is to say, CIA Special Forces operatives operating in the country for a good many years before the arrival of the first official ground troops. What will be also ignored is that, given his background, his age, and the timeline of events, Stephen Stills not only could indeed have seen action in Vietnam, he would seem to have been a prime candidate for such an assignment. After which, of course, he could rather quickly become, stop me if you've heard this one before, an icon of the peace generation. Another of these icons of the Laurel Canyon's most flamboyant residents is of a young man by the name of David Crosby, founding members of the Centennial Laurel Canyon band, the Byrds, as well as, of course, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Crosby is, not surprisingly, a son of the Annapolis graduate and World War II military intelligence officer, Major Floyd Delafield Crosby. Like others in this story, Floyd Crosby spent much of his post-service time traveling the world. Those travels landed him in places like Haiti, where he paid a visit in 1927 when the country just happened to be, coincidentally of course, under military occupation by the U.S. Marines. One of the Marines doing the occupying was a guy that we met earlier by the name of Captain Claude Andrew Phillips. What a coincidence. But David Crosby is much more than just the son of Major Floyd Delafield Crosby. David Van Cortlandt Crosby, as it turns out, is a scion of closely intertwined Van Cortlandt, Van Schuyler, I believe, and Van Rensselaer families. And while you're probably thinking, the Van who families? I can assure you that if you plug those names in over at Wikipedia, you can spend a pretty fair amount of time reading up on the power wielded by this clan for the last, 2.5 quarter centuries or so. Suffice it to say that the Crosby family tree includes a truly dizzying array of U.S. senators and congressmen, state senators and assemblymen, governors, mayors, judges, Supreme Court justices, Revolutionary and Civil War generals, signers of the Declaration of Independence, and members of the Continental Congress. It also includes, I should hasten to add, for those of you with a taste for such things, more than a few high-ranking Masons. Stephen Van Rensselaer, I believe, the third, for example, reportedly served as Grand Master of Masons of New York. And if all that isn't impressive enough, according to the New England Genealogical Society, David Van Cortlandt Crosby is also the direct descendant of founding fathers and Federalist Papers author Alexander Hamilton and John Jay. If there is, as many believe, a network of elite families that has shaped national and world events for a very long time, then it is probably safe to say that David Crosby is a bloodline member of that clan, which may explain, come to think of it, why his semen seems to be in such demand in certain circles, because if we're being honest here, it certainly can't be due to his looks or talent. Yeah. If America had royalty, then David Crosby would probably be a duke or a prince or something similar. I'm not really sure how that shit works. But other than that, he is just a normal, run-of-the-mill kind of guy who just happened to shine, as one of Laurel Canyon's brightest stars, and who, I guess I should add, has a real fondness for guns, especially handguns, which he has maintained a sizable collection of for his entire life. According to those closest to him, it is a rare occasion when Mr. Crosby is not packing heat. John Phillips also owned and sometimes carried handguns. And according to Crosby himself, he has on at least one occasion discharged a firearm in anger at another human being. all of which made him, of course, an obvious choice for the Flower Children to rally around. Another shining star of the Laurel Canyon scene just a few years later will be singer-songwriter Jackson Browne, who is, are you getting bored with this as I am, the product of a career military family. Brown's father was assigned to a post-war reconstruction work in Germany, which very likely means that he was in the employ of the OSS, precursor to the CIA. As readers of my Understanding the F Word may recall, U.S. involvement in post-war reconstruction in Germany largely consisted of maintaining as much of the Nazi infrastructure as possible while shielding war criminals from capture and prosecution against that backdrop. Jackson Browne was born in a military hospital in Heidelberg, Germany. Some 2 decades later, he emerged as, oh, never mind. Let's talk instead about 3 other Laurel Canyon vocalists who will rise to dizzying heights of fame and fortune: Gary Beckley, Dan Peek, and Dewey Bunnell. Individually, these 3 names are probably unknown to virtually all readers, but collectively as the band America, the 3 will score huge hits in the early 1970s with such songs as Ventura Highway, A Horse with No Name, and The Wizard of Oz themed The Tin Man. I guess I probably don't need to add here that all 3 of these lads were products of the military/intelligence community. Beckley's dad was the commander of the now defunct West Runeslip U.S. Air Force Base near London, England, a facility deeply immersed in intelligence operation. Brunel's and Peek's fathers were both career Air Force officers serving under Beckley's dad at West Runeslip, which is where the 3 boys first met. We are going to skip ahead in this. Let's see, I want to make sure. I mean, this does just keep going. So, I mean, Brandon DeWild, or Monkey Mickey Dolenz, Van Dyke Parks, James Taylor, all of these guys. So, but for the sake of time, we're just going to skip right here to the very last. So, it would, of course, make sense these days for an inspiring musician to venture out to Los Angeles. But in those days, the centers of the music universe were Nashville, Detroit, and New York. It wasn't the industry that drew the Laurel Canyon crowd, you see, but rather the Laurel Canyon crowd that transformed Los Angeles into the epicenter of the music industry. To what then do we attribute this unprecedented gathering of future musical superstars in the hills above Los Angeles? What was it that inspired them all to head out west? Perhaps Neil Young said it best when he told an interviewer that he couldn't really say why he headed out to LA circa 1966. He and others, quote, "were just going like lemmings." So, on that note, I think we're going to wrap it up here today. We definitely ended up going a lot longer than I intended to, but I mean, this is a really big, yes, thank you for correcting me, but that's not going to help. Anyways, nonetheless, didn't intend to quite go this long, but this is going to set up next Thursday for a continuation of the Laurel Canyon conspiracy, also some more MK Ultra, LSD stuff, because once again, even though other researchers don't focus on this quite as much, and that's fine for them, I am going to focus on it because drugs are an incredibly massive aspect of our culture. And yeah, you know, that is more focused on when you talk about MK Ultra. That is done on purpose. We will cover that as well. There's just a lot more there, and it gives the complete picture. So this is why we are going to be covering it. So on that note, let's get out of here. But make sure and head over to our sponsor, Nadu Shave Company, NADEAUSHAVECO.com. Make sure and use promo code RISE15 for 15% off. And make sure and go pick up some awesome soaps. Go pick up a razor. You will not be disappointed with anything you get. If you want to help support the show, please head on over to risetoliberty.com/coffee. Go buy me a coffee. Help me stay up so I can do all of this research. Make sure and get everything in order, and hopefully give you guys the best content I possibly can. There's more of that coming. Also, if you don't want to do buy me a coffee, you can head over to Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/rise-to-liberty. And both websites, Buy Me a Coffee or Ko-Fi, you can do a one-time donation or monthly recurring donation. Either way, it is up to you. Cash is king when it comes to supporting the show. Otherwise, you can also head over to risetoliberty.store. Go check out what merch we have. We just dropped a new design, Mind Control, an American pastime since 1953. Comes with the Mind Control design on the front, big old Rise to Liberty on the back. You can get this in two different types of shirt. It's really just the quality of the shirt itself. Both shirts are high quality, but they are 100% cotton. Shirts I also wear myself. You can also get the design in a coffee mug if you want. It's an 11-ounce ceramic coffee mug. So go check that out. Other than that, one thing I do want to do real quick. Let's see here. Let me pull this up so I can make sure and get it right. I need to give a massive shout out to one of our viewers, Mudcat81. Shout out to you, bro. Thank you so much for all the support. This is for you, dude. Keep chugging along. The one thing I want to say is it is kind of alienating sometimes to be able to be in a community like this where, not a lot of people know this stuff and not a lot of people believe it. I mean, even though this is all well-documented stuff, everything I've talked about today, you can find from mainstream sources. There's no like conspiracy.blackhelicopter.net, All of this stuff is all mainstream newspapers and everything else. But even at that, some people will still talk down to you and say you're crazy, you're conspiracy theorists and everything. But there are other people out there like us. And Mudcat, welcome to the Rise to Liberty family. Once again, thank you so much for all of your support. Looking forward to having you be along with the Rise to Liberty family for a long time. So thank you for that. I wanted to make sure and give you a shout out. So other than that, we will be streaming again, guaranteed on Tuesday. So this coming up Tuesday, look out for another show. We will be diving back into the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And then Thursday of this week, we will be diving back into Laurel Canyon. Next Sunday, we will be diving into the Constitution, some Revolutionary War history, and some straight rebellion type stuff. We'll be talking about ways that people can protect themselves from, the incoming tyranny, all of these different things, and getting into a lot of other fun stuff like that. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's show. Make sure to hit the like, subscribe, share, comment, all of these different things. And other than that, let's see right here. So other than that, until next time, stay free, my friends.